This is Space Cat's Peace Turtles, the unofficial podcast for Fantasy Flight's Twilight Imperium.
Episode 57.
Galactic Council,
Developing Skills.
music by Ben Prunty, featuring Matt Martins and Hunter Donaldson. The votes are in. We've tallied them up. Guess what, everyone? We have a new senator. We did it. We have today's a Galactic Council episode, and our new counselors have been voted upon. There's a couple runoff elections still going, and that'll probably happen for a few more days.
Yeah, in Space Florida, they can't decide.
Yeah, Space Florida is constantly doing its recounting.
Which, who'd have thunk, a recount in Space Florida,
Yeah. It's really a disaster out there. But
after the space election of Space 2000, the space general election where we had the space president, George Space Bush, versus Al Space Gore, you just think this is a podcast about Twilight Imperium and also politics.
We have a guest today, Hunter. We're joined by our friend EJ Sanders. EJ, say hi.
Hello.
Hey, EJ. I don't know. We just decided to add EJ to the episode. There's not really any reason. Just
he's not here for it. He's not here to push something. He's not plugging his new game or something.
I mean, I guess if you want to watch the Arkansas Razorbacks hockey, you can hear EJ. I just plugged that for him, despite his better.
What are they called again? They have a cool name.
They're just the Razorbacks.
Oh, really? I thought they were called the Ice Hogs.
No.
Sure, yeah, you can call them.
Did I really make that up? That's not even what they're called.
There's a team in the AHL called the Ice Hogs. Anyways, I want to introduce the episode, but then we're gonna cut away. We actually did the thing we said we weren't gonna do.
Yeah,
which is that we introduced EJ,
did the thing.
And then we're gonna ignore him for about 5 minutes.
No, you did the thing.
So thanks, EJ. We'll call you back on here in just a few minutes. Our episode's gonna be a Galactic Council episode. The idea was proposed by our dear friend Laura. And the Galactic Council voted on it. This was actually a really intense election this time. There were a lot more suggestions than we normally get, and a way higher volume of voting. And Laura's just barely eked it out.
Yeah, what's really crazy about this Galactic Council election is that Laura's actually did not win the popular vote, but due to how we organized the Galactic College, it won.
So the episode is going to be about developing skills, specifically choosing factions with the intent to develop certain skills. Or more importantly, in your first games of Twilight Imperium, what factions should you play and what should you expect, what knowledge should you expect to gain from those factions?
Right.
But before that, when we recorded last week, we were about to play a game. And then we played a game with our good Yin Brotherhood.
Oh, yeah.
And then we released the episode saying that we had played the game that we hadn't played yet. So, Hunter, do you want to tell us about how that game went?
Oh, it was great. Matt had a horrible game.
Great is a really interesting word that you used to describe that game.
Yeah,
Matt, I had a different experience.
Right, yeah, Matt goofed up hardcore. Do we want to talk about your game first or my game?
First off, what'd you say?
Well, do we want to talk about your game first or my game?
I want to talk about my game because it doesn't take very long to talk about.
All right, yeah, do it.
I was the Yin, and I was excited to be the Yin. And I felt like I was doing a pretty typical strong Yin game. I didn't have the most amazing first round. I keep messing up first rounds. When I get on TTS, I just start shooting from the hip, and I don't really focus in on my first round, and I keep messing stuff up, really basic stuff.
Yeah.
So I had an empty. A pretty empty home system, but with Yin, it's I wanted to expand a bunch. Of course I'm going to have a little bit of empty stuff in my home system. Anyways, SAR decided to threaten me, and then SAR attacked my home system, and then SAR threatened me with agendas, and SAR threatened me again later on an equidistant system, and then SAR threatened another system in my... It just never stopped. SAR got to hold it over. Kraken was our... Kraken, who now has the nickname Kraken the Audacious, because that's what I called him. It was the most audacious plays I've ever seen. He just was every action of Kraken's would start with, So Matt, you want to give me your ceasefire to not attack you somewhere, anywhere, always somewhere? So yeah, I don't know. I got held over a barrel. I didn't really want to make the deals because I was yin. So a lot of the times I felt like I had a decent ability to hold on or very quickly take it back. And that was generally true. The only times I did make deals is when I could see that it wasn't going to work out in my favor. But the upsetting part was that nobody else was really in a position to do anything about it. It was a 5-player game. We should say that. And myself and Sar were on the most distant parts of the map. We played like a normal 5-player map without trade goods. We used one of Kraken, I think it was Kraken. Yeah, one of Kraken's maps that he designed that is specifically designed to not have trade goods. And I don't know, I don't think that method works as well as we had always hoped maybe it would. Maybe it takes an even more specific map, but the distances are a big deal. And in this game, it was a huge factor because, I mean, obviously there was way more distance between SAR and most other players. And so SAR got to just get away with a lot versus who was it? Necro?
Right. Necro was way far.
They were in the 5-player position, and they were sandwiched, and their game went more south than mine did because he had 2 neighbors to constantly have to deal with. So Necro and I had a hard time. Nobody really kept SAR in check, and yeah. I mean, how did your game go, Hunter?
Yeah, my game was really fun. I tried something weird, and it mostly paid off. Obviously, I didn't win, but I felt good about it. I had been thinking for a long time about playing PDS-focused Arborec, and I got a really good opportunity to try it. I almost didn't do it because, like you start with Majin, and then you get Sarween, right? But then just staying in yellow and red seemed like a weird choice. But I did have a yellow skip, which I ended up not using. So like I took a slice to get a yellow skip, and then I was like, well, actually, I might just go PDS, which means I kind of want Graviton. But I felt like it was really effective. What was crazy is that, I was playing as a neighbor to Necro, and then Necro's other neighbor was Extra. So that's also another reason I was like, oh, I want to do PDS because we'll just kind of sandwich him. I mean, like we'll have so much influence over that.
He so quickly ran out of any viable options, and it was a rough go for him for sure, and not of any fault of his own too. Like he set up and he was like ready to combat, but then it just, I mean, what are you supposed to do against all those PDS and stuff? Yeah,
I mean, I felt the way that everything played out, it was kind of a perfect storm for somebody like SAR, basically.
Yeah.
Which I do feel bad about because it does kind of feel like, oh, I kind of played into the landscape that helped SAR win because I played a very slow Arborec game. I did not try and... I kind of just like expanded slowly but surely and got to the point where I had my borders really secured. At one point, I had both of the equidistant systems, which I felt really strongly about. I think you eventually took back. I think you Matt. I think took the one that was on your side, but still, it was a really fun game. I think I got going a little too slowly, which is kind of the case with Arborec a lot of times, especially if they don't take Mechatol, and I was not able to get Mechatol. And yeah, I think the last round, I would have gotten to like, I always hate it when people bring this up actually, but I think I had like...
You were going to win.
I was going to win. I had like 12 points basically in the pocket, but... But it was...
You weren't talking like about that either. Like you weren't even like wouldn't shut up about how I was gonna win if it had gotten to me. But you were ahead of me, and you would have won had it not been for SAR being able to claim.
I just couldn't do it fast enough. That was the problem.
Yeah, and I kind of have been harping all week, like on the Discord, about how I felt like the Extra could have done more. But to the Extra's credit, like what Extra thought they were doing was getting good deals out of SAR. He was wheeling and dealing with SAR, and he was in the lead most of the game. So to his, from his perspective, why would he start crushing SAR when he's getting stuff out of it and scoring points and staying in the lead? So I don't actually mean to blame Extra, but I just know that in the games I've seen Extra next to SAR, which is especially on the stream where Hunter got to just threaten me for free and ruin my game.
So much
like
fun.
Extra is one of the few factions that can keep SAR in check in a really interesting way. And since I was getting the crap end of the deal, I really wanted Extra to do something about it. Probably should have tried to pay them more, but we were very rarely neighbors. Anyways, I think that's enough about that game. We've, it's hard to it's hard to say much about it when I barely got to do anything normal all game.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you just kind of sucked. So
I just fought back from the like I spent the entire second round attacking my own home system and getting it back, and I spent the entire third round just filling out my pie slice again. Like that 3 rounds of the game were the exact same position I ended round 1.
Well, I got to tell you, I want to say this real quick before we move on. I'm getting tired of playing against you as Yin. I think you should be banned from picking Yin. I'm tired of it.
Yeah.
So much Yin play from you.
I keep wanting to play Xcha, and people keep blocking my Xcha picks, so I never get to do that. But let's dive into this beginners episode. I'm excited for this one because it feels like it's been a while since we've done an episode that's really for like completely new players. We do plenty of topics that are like, let's like talk about somewhat, more basic thoughts, but this is the first one in a while that's like straight up basically designed for brand new players. So if you're trying to get new people to the table, this is when I suggest showing people and trying to get them into the game with.
I wish we had like a special tag for those types of episodes. That
I know, right?
Yeah, we need to figure out something like that. But I think I really like what we've got for you today. We have kind of combed through all of the factions that are available, and well, first of all, we about cut it in half as far as we're just going to recommend about half of the factions for new players.
It barely builds off of, I don't remember even what episode it was, but at one point Hunter and I sort of put forward our idea of like what are good replacements for starting factions, like what the learn to play gives you. We wanted to swap some ideas out. So this is a bunch of those and then adding a couple more in. So EJ, like we already said, he's been sitting here very patiently waiting to talk again. EJ's with us. EJ has for a while been the only person in Northwest Arkansas with a copy of TI. So he has had a lot of experience with teaching new players. That's been basically his whole past year. So I'm excited to have his input on this because we actually got kind of spoiled in Portland because we had a pretty solid group where we weren't having to teach as often.
For sure.
Yeah, teaching is kind of rough because it's like especially when it's every other game that you play.
Right.
That's the kind of the annoying part of having the only copy of TI within 200 miles. But you kind of learn that you're learning to teach all the time, and I've kind of got it down now. But I would like to play more games now where
with
I
people that can play. Yeah.
Right.
TI is a whole different game when everyone knows what they're doing, and it's a lot more fun. So let's get it to where people can learn those things. Let's start talking about some factions. What do you say?
Yeah, I say let's do the show.
Hunter says yeah, EJ?
Yeah, we could do that.
We're all in agreement. So we had our own little Galactic Council, and we have agreed to go ahead and do the episode for you all now. The first one, I think the most basic factions for anyone to just dive in and start playing and not have to put up with anything really that weird, and we're kind of lumping these two together, is just Barony Aletnev and the L1Z1X.
Yeah.
They're both going to get to use big ships. They both have some strengths, like Barony's got some command counter, extra help. L1Z1X has just the ability to take stuff a little bit easier, but neither abilities are very hard to understand.
Right.
And they're both solid factions too. Like that's a big part of it. You're not going to see us recommend any factions that are bad because it's not good. It's not easy to learn the game when you're playing as a bad faction.
Right, and you might have a really hard, like we don't have like Sardak or Muat in the list, or even Winu.
Right,
and all three of those, I think, for the same reasons, which is that you might just have a really slow kind of experience because you didn't properly manage. You didn't have all of this knowledge of the game already. But I think starting with Barony and L1 makes a lot of sense. They're both pretty powerful factions, but they're like, a lot of people make an argument that Sardak is a good starting faction because it is just focused on combat.
Well, it's very basic too. Plus 1/2 combat. Got it. I get it. I don't have to think about weird abilities. Sardak is playing regular TI with just a minor bonus that is incredibly easy to understand. You don't have to think about anything else, technically.
And I'm going to use that logic here, though, for these two factions because I think they're a lot stronger factions. Their abilities are a bit more complex, but essentially, as long as you understand that, hey, this is a spaceship game, this is a science fiction game, build fleets, build spaceships, you'll be playing a pretty decent Barony and L1 game. Now, I feel like the weakness of these two picks is tech. That they're both like pretty tech dependent factions, and you might be just getting to know the tech system. But I still think even if you were kind of, fudging the numbers on like what your tech picks were, if you were picking kind of in the wrong tech direction, you're still, even just like if you were just focusing on like, oh, I'm just going to build big fleets, you would do all right. You wouldn't have a horrible game, right?
Right. Yeah. I'm kind of curious between the two. I don't know, EJ, who would you rather give a brand new player? Like if it was between those two, who would you give to them first and why?
I would give Barony. Barony's the most like space risk, and so that mindset coming into the game is a lot of what players have. And I mean, I've taught probably 15 people how to play. About 14 of them had that idea coming into it. Right. So Barony of Letnev offers the most flexibility in that position, where you're going to be able to build those big fleets and move and you'll feel successful.
Right. I like that idea too of using what they're expecting kind of against it. Like, okay, so you think you're going to play Space Risk, so I'll at least give you something that lets you do some of that without it completely falling apart in your face. But you're going to along, especially with Barony, because of like the trade good thing, like, oh, I want to get trade goods so I can use this ability. So how do I get trade goods? Okay, I guess I got to make some deals, and you sort of introduce yourself to that aspect of the game. But yeah, I agree that like if you just go ahead and accept that they're going to try to play Space Risk and lean into that and let them get a race that can do that well, they're going to, in their next game, see how they might do things differently, especially if Space Risk, doesn't end up winning them the game, which is more likely than not.
Well, it's also about keeping them engaged as well, which is the biggest thing. So, I mean, like, I want them to have fun. is kind of
you want them to come back, and so if you give them Barony Letnev, they're going to not have a terrible time in almost every case. Like they're going to be successful, at least.
They're not going to be oppressed.
Set out to do right.
Mm-hmm. One thing I like about Barony as a pick for a new player is that it calls attention to fleet supply, which is one of the things that I feel like new players struggle with the most. Is understanding like how fleet supply works and like kind of obeying it. And it's nice that Barony of Letnev is sort of like, here's this thing called fleet supply, pay attention to it, but you've got a lot of leeway with Barony, which actually that also could be kind of a point against, in that it has a ability that is an exception to the rule. So maybe I would even use that as an argument to kind of lean L1, because it's just their only exception to the traditional rule is what, like Harrow, which is like kind of a niche case. You might not even have any bombardment happen, or be in a situation where bombardment is going to happen more than once.
And assimilating is even less likely. Especially for new players.
And it's something that like I think a good teacher would kind of look out to remind a new player of, anyways. So yeah, and also like factoring that into your stuff is kind of, I think, a higher level strategy thing that I don't think you're going to see a lot of new players catch on to. But if an L1 is just pumping out dreads, then you're pretty solid. Yeah, I think they're both fine picks, though. Even with the Barony fleet supply thing possibly being a little bit confusing.
Right. I mean, I've had games, even as an experienced player, where like I tend to do this anyways, where it's like I'm playing as a faction, but then I kind of forget I'm playing as a faction and I'm just playing vanilla TI. Right. And as Barony, I can think of a specific game where I never used the fleet supply thing because I just forgot I had it. I forgot I was playing Barony. And you still have a good game. Like you can completely forget Barony's like primary ability and still have a great game as Barony. That's sort of the point.
I agree.
So let's talk about, I think, what is the next like most important thing for players to learn about, and the factions that are great at helping them learn those things, which is the importance of ground forces in TI4.
Right.
Ground forces are like the biggest deal in the world. So our next major recommendations are primarily, obviously, the Federation of Sol. We routinely say Federation of Sol is like probably the best faction in the game, or definitely among the best.
Right.
And we're also going to talk a little bit about Yin Brotherhood, but I think we need to talk about Federation of Sol the most. Because ground forces, but also to kind of build off of this Barony point, command counters are obviously a huge deal.
Right, and also a system that new players struggle with, and it's nice that Federation of Soul kind of gets an easier go with command counters than any faction, because they basically start with hyper, and then you are even in a good position to get hyper themselves.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good reason to use them. I think like that they're just like such a strong faction that the new player is probably going to have fun.
Yeah.
It would also maybe be a good way to, like, if you kind of told, gave a new player a good idea of like what to do, telling a new player to take Mechatol Rex. I mean, as Soul, that could end up like if that new player was catching on to the game pretty well. I mean, that new player could literally win their first game.
Right.
And then also understand how important Mechatol Rex is as a resource in Twilight Imperium,
Right.
which, I mean, that's kind of the whole point, right? Like,
Yeah. There's something to be said about command counters just in terms of like, okay, Soul's going to get one extra one, and like using command counters to learn about keeping your options open, like
Right.
your ability to just do different actions. There's nothing worse than being command counter starved. Because then you just can't even do the things you need to win. But if you have a surplus of command tokens, then you're able to do so much more. And so if you're Soul sitting on Mechatol Rex, you're already gaining one extra one. If you get hyper, you're gaining two extra ones. If you have Mechatol Rex, you're gaining two more. That's four extra command counters every single round that you're just gonna have, which means you're going to just straight up, you're gonna get more experience with the game. You're going to do more than almost any other player in the game, just because you have the economy to do it with.
Right, economy. That's what I wanted to jump into, is exactly the economics of the game revolve around command counters and around your resources that are at your disposal. And so what you were saying there, ground forces being so important in the game, new players don't grasp that right off the bat,
right?
Because it's space risk, it's not ground risk,
right?
so they don't grasp that right off the bat. That Federation of Soul, they see that race, and I haven't had a single player actually play them in their first game that I've played in. So they don't have that kind of mentality towards it. But once they learn, if they learn with Federation of Soul, you're going to learn quickly that getting two ground forces with one command counter
anywhere you
yeah,
want. Like
anywhere.
it's hard to explain that to a new player and have them be like, oh, that's awesome. Like they're not going to care. But to then see it in action of like, I just took that planet and then the next turn I added two ground forces and now you're never getting it back. Like that can be a whole, a huge deal for their game.
Right.
I also think there's something to be said for like Federation of Souls racial tech or faction tech being really easy to comprehend. Like,
yes.
I think when you're playing a faction for the first time and you're just getting used to Twilight Imperium, there's like, there's the abilities on the sheet, right? And those are things that you're going to be like, oh, I don't even understand how this is good. And then a lot of times the faction tech on top of that is also kind of like, this is just so many options I have. The fact that Soul's faction tech are literally just like, no, they're just upgrades. They're just good upgrades.
Yeah.
That's nice. That's like one less thing you don't have to learn. One less thing that's basically just like, nope, it's good. I get how it's good. It's the same thing I have, but better. It's really simple.
Everything. I mean, as with most games, the Soul being the humans, it's just the generic, like, you're going to do everything that you thought you were going to do, and you're going to do it a little bit better.
Right.
So we need to talk about the Yin then as well, because the Yin are kind of a special case in this, but it proves the same point to a certain extent, which is, and I think Yin is a little bit different. Now, Yin can do the Mechatol thing, but I think Yin is also very good at taking any system that someone wants. Oh, that Aranam Mir system looks really, really cool. I would like to have that. And Yin kind of just has this advantage of getting it and holding it all game. I mean, especially if it's a game of all noobs, I don't think most of them are going to even realize like how much they have to bring to the table to dislodge a Yin Brotherhood planet.
Sure. I honestly, I kind of differ here. I kind of feel like Yin Brotherhood is maybe not like, I feel a little bit different, mostly because of devotion, and I would not want
that's absolutely
a new
true.
player to get caught up on devotion
It's
or not
dangerous.
understand how to do the math. I would say of the factions we've talked about thus far, this is the first like major pitfall I think we found. So I mean,
Sure.
as long as you're explaining to the player like listen, this devotion ability, it's like it's a dire thing. It's not like a good thing to use all the time.
Yeah.
Then I think all of that stands to be what's really cool about the indoctrination ability is that it teaches the player to look at the planets they have in front of them as like a very important resource. Like they're going to get that obviously from building, but understanding that like, all of these planets have like an assigned value to them, and I need to like flip them strategically. That's like kind of something that I think like takes a little while to get the hang of. And it's also
and knowing what the opportunity cost of that is too. I mean, we should say, if we're trying to direct this episode towards newer players, we should say indoctrination is the ability where you can spend 2 influence to convert an invading ground force into one of your own, or a defending ground force into one of your own. And so being able to look at a ground combat and say, it's certain, I can see how 2 influence is obviously worth me making this basically an automatic fight, or like way in my favor, and seeing how those ground combats can completely change the tide of battle is a huge deal. I think that's a big lesson to learn too, in seeing how like 1 ground force difference can make all the difference in the world. And so in Yin's case, being able to turn any ground combat into a 2 ground force difference is just completely, it's colossal.
Right. Well, it goes back to teaching new players doing the most with the least. It's kind of thing. You don't have to manage as much with Yin. You can kind of manage what you have, and you can do what you did in the game that we played, where you can just build a highway to Mechatol and just hang out.
Yeah,
and that's that's a bold strategy. It's a strategy people use.
Right.
And
I
Yin's
think
good at
any
that.
faction that can hold Mechatol easily is a good faction for someone to learn on, because if you can see the value of Mechatol, you're learning a lot more about the game than a typical person trying to play Space Risk. The idea of Mechatol Rex, it goes against Space Risk. Like there's in Risk, there isn't just like, also if you take North Africa,
that's the
you
Ukraine.
earn points faster than everybody else. Like that doesn't really exist to the same scale as Mechatol Rex does in TI. So I think anything that helps you take and hold Mechatol Rex is a valuable lesson to be had.
I agree. All right. Well, yeah. So the next one that we have that I think moves on to a very different. So like everything we've covered thus far, I think the goal has been to get people to understand like the units. Basically, we had 2 factions we recommended up top that were like, this is about fleets. We want ground forces understood. Obviously, next is going to be Muat with the War Sun, JK.
Yeah, we really want to learn. Yeah,
right. No, we get it. But the next thing that I think is really important for new players to understand is the importance of like the order of play. So I think the next faction we want to talk about is the Nalu Collective, because of how insanely cool their initiative ability is.
So
and
Nalu starts with a token that gives them 0 initiative, which means they go first in every action phase, and also they score first in every status phase is the other end result. And kind of the bigger thing, but just in general, seeing the ability of like getting the jump on somebody else, and what kind of power that can grant you, or the power of scoring objectives first, like what that does for you, is a huge important lesson, because it starts to redirect your brain into being about the objectives as opposed to Space Risk, right? These first 4 factions have been about Space Risk, but like you need a faction like Nalu Collective to kind of showcase like, hey, there's actually this whole other component of the game that is the most important part of the game, and you need to pay attention to it.
Right. I also think it's really good for getting players to look at retreating as like being an important aspect of the game. Nalu, obviously, they have a better retreat, but it's also a more sensible retreat. Like I think people mess up the retreat rules a lot, and if you're Nalu, it's a lot harder for that to actually occur, which is nice.
Yeah.
So I think it's easier for people to wrap their heads around retreat in general as an option if they kind of get like an easier go at it.
Right. Every single one of these factions has been you have easy mode at X. And Nalu's is like you have an easy retreat, so you can understand why it's so valuable, so that when you play a faction that has a harder time at doing that, you can know when it's really worth doing and when it's not.
Right. I think understanding like the importance of initiative when it comes to scoring VPs, that's a really niche case that like is not immediately apparent. That I think with Nalu you're going to click into a lot faster, realizing like, oh, I'm going to score first every round.
Right.
And realizing, when you get to that final round, that's also one of those like kind of passive abilities that I could see someone basically not really appreciating their first game and then it like winning them the whole game and being like, oh wow, okay, cool. I guess that is really important.
0, yeah.
Right. I have noticed a pitfall though. There is a pitfall to this one, which is that racial promissory note. You're gonna have to if it's a first time player, you gotta tell them like, hey, that note is really serious.
Yeah. Well, and then even if we're talking about a learning game, like if you give that out, that'll be a learning moment,
right?
To be sure.
You messed up.
We almost, when we first were writing up this episode, we almost included a bunch of bad factions sort of as like those learning moment things, and this is the only one that really
teachable
got
moments.
these teachable moments. That's the only one that got stuck in is if you give that out and that's why you lose, you will now know why we say never ever ever never give it out.
Oh yeah.
I think even it's hard to explain how good it is to like be able to act first in the action phase, like whether or not that is good or not. I mean, obviously, like I think a new player would be able to recognize I get to do Imperial as the first action and like claim an objective right away. That's going to be a powerful thing. But I think beyond that, like knowing, having the opportunities to like jump on someone's home system or something, I don't think those are going to come up as often. But on the flip side of that, we have also included the Isarl tribes, because sort of that kind of gets at the other idea that we wanted to talk about with timing, which is Isarl tribes has this whole stall ability. And I mean, in TI3, it was a much bigger deal. And that was a really teachable idea, was like why it's important to stall a lot. And the new Isarl tribes, it's not as common, but to spend an action card to stall, I mean, if for a new player to look at that ability, they would be like, why would I ever do that? Like, why is spending an action to get rid of a card from my hand? Why is that at all good? And getting their head wrapped around like why you want to wait things out until you can do your timing attack. Like, why is that important? I think
without
it's a big
consequence.
Lesson. Yeah, exactly. Learning like what it means to attack without consequence is a huge factor in learning how to win with most factions. Like the most common way to win is I'm acting last, I did the thing, you can't stop me, and now I'm gonna win.
Yeah. I also think it kind of plays into understanding the command counter economy again. Like playing Isarls when you start looking at other people's sheets, and like that's a big moment. Like when you start realizing like, oh, a lot of this information is just out in the open, and I can just look over and see like, oh, so-and-so only has 2 more actions. That's it.
Right.
That's all they've got. After that, they're done, and I can do whatever I want, basically.
Yeah, and honestly, Magion Implants, kind of the same story. Or is it, I may have just said that wrong. Their ability.
We mess it up all the time.
I know, we mess it up all the time, and I don't have it up in front of me. But their faction technology that allows them to look at another player's hand and steal a card from them is a huge deal, because I mean, you're just going to straight up have an advantage nobody else has, which is seeing other people's hands and knowing how to play against it. And action cards are a whole other level of the game that experienced players just have the checklist in their head, right? Okay, I know that 1 sabotage has been played, and I know there's a few more, and I know I need to look out for signal jamming, and I need to look out for, public disgrace. But Isarl gets to actively look at someone else's hand, see the scary action cards that they might be up against, and go, oh, I need to figure out how I'm going to play against that action card. I mean, that's a huge ability for a new player.
Yeah, very true. And also, like, just the fact that they're getting more action cards means that they're getting exposed to a lot more of that information as far as like what action cards are available. That's another thing that, like, early on, you don't know all of the action cards in the deck. Unless you've literally gone through and read them all and like understand the game already, which then why are you here? But getting that exposure is good, and also there's kind of a lot of wiggle room with it. You're gonna get a lot of action cards, so it's okay if like you burn a couple doing like kind of the wrong thing. You're probably still gonna have a pretty healthy hand at the end. Also, I think you get a lot of really good feedback from other players, because I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody or a newer player discard an action card and everyone see it and be like, whoa, huh.
You sure?
Like, yeah, and just kind of calling that out. I think that is, well, it's like kind of, it's maybe not everybody's favorite way to learn anything, to just be called out for messing up. But still, you're like, even if like, let's say you read a card and you're like, oh, I don't really know why this is so relevant. And then you discard it and everybody's like, whoa, shouldn't have done that. Then now you know that you need to look back into that card.
Right. Yeah, I think the other kind of factor that I see anytime we recommend Isarl to new players, I see this complaint come up, and I think it's valid, which is that problem of if you're going to end up with too many action cards, and maybe you'll get overwhelmed.
Right.
But personally, I think you gain action cards slowly enough, and it's not like you have to know the entire deck of action cards from you only need to know what's in your hand.
Right.
So you're gaining a few at a time, and you can judge them on their merits. And I feel like most new players can pretty much grasp like what they need to do with those action cards. Now, I will say, being able, if you've got a hand of 15 action cards, being able to remember to use all of those action cards, especially when most of them are going to be reactionary things, that's incredibly difficult and sort of a flaw in using the Isarl tribes. Because I don't think that's a teachable thing. I think that's a like, you just have to play a few games before you start to understand the timing windows and when to like pay attention to your action cards.
Yeah, and I think one thing I don't like about Isarl for new players is like the like draw more and then discard one, because that's basically saying like you need to already know which one is the bad one basically in your hand. So yeah, like kind of like what I was saying before with like, oh, you discard a card and everybody's like, oh, that was really good. Why did you discard that? Like, it's a lot of pressure on the player to have to then like kind of already understand how these things measure up. But like outside of that, like I think like kind of part of our perspective is about what factions are going to teach you certain styles of play or like what is important aspects of the strategy of the game. And I think Isarl like kind of is better, like kind of is the only one that does the thing that they do, right?
Yeah.
So like I think everybody needs to play Isarl at some point. They're not a weird like niche case faction, even if they are not super easy to play and can be overwhelming, give you a overwhelming amount of information in the form of all those action cards. I think everybody learns about timing from Isarl, basically. That's when you learn, like, because it's so much easier when you're playing Isarl to look over at your neighbor and be like, oh, wow, I can stall that person out. And like then once you learn that, you can take that type of tactic to like any game and realize that like, oh, like I could play as any faction and stall someone out. But I feel like you're only really going to learn that type of play from Isarl just because they're just so adept at it.
Well, I think it's also about decision making, though, and I think this is one of the first times we'll see a race really rely on those decision making tactics and that's just intangible. That's intangible in TI. Is you have to make those decisions at some point, and whether they're good or bad, like you're saying, even though they're consequential in a lot of cases, whenever you're playing with a race like Isarl, it's actually kind of a good thing that they have to make those decisions on the spot. Like you mentioned earlier, you have to draw multiple action cards and discard one. You make that decision on the spot, and somebody notes that and says something to you. You've learned something that's actually even more valuable in that moment.
That's right. You didn't even have to play the action card to realize like why it's good or whatever. Like you gain that information through other people.
Yeah,
correct.
For sure.
And I think honestly too, to go back to one of the other points of just talking about like things that are easier for factions, like we want you to play easier factions. If you get transparasteel plating, where you can do actions after other people have passed and they can't spend action cards on you, that's great for you. Like you're gonna get stuff done that nobody else gets to get done. Now that's like a little bit higher level of thinking, but it serves that same point of I'm gonna be able to get away with stuff that nobody else can get away with, and so then I can learn better like what sorts of, it's almost like what you were saying, Hunter, like you're the things you're doing as a Isarl no one else is doing, but other factions are going to learn from that. Like a Yin or a Ghosts can do last minute plays that stretch them over the finish line to win.
Right.
Yssaril does that, tenfold. They do that way better than anybody else. So yeah, you find those weird plays. The biggest thing is like just learning the combos. You get to figure out those action card combos, and you get to do them without being interrupted by other players.
Right.
So you can really see how they would play out, and then over time you get introduced the foils in your plan, and you learn from each foil.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I mean, the more and more we talk about it, the more and more I feel like Yssaril is a great place to start with Twilight Imperium. Even if it might be a little bit more difficult than some of these others, I think you're gonna have a lot of fun with the game really quickly.
Oh yeah, I think that's the biggest factor. Honestly, is like the fun factor with Yssaril tribes is through the roof.
Right.
Infinite.
Let's talk another faction that is kind of information overload, but because they get the easy end of so many things, I think the Universities of Jolnar are a huge faction to play. And this is another one I see people recommend against because, now you need to sit there and you need to learn what every single tech does.
Yeah.
But my argument is always, because you basically have access to every single tech, you don't. Like, you're going to get so much tech throughout the game that just get whatever you want. You read a tech, you read fleet logistics, you go, that looks cool, get it. I do not care. It's your first game. Like, I'm not going to critique any of your tech picks as the Universities of Jolnar. You're going to get whatever you want, and all of it is going to make you better. Every tech is going to make you better, unless you buy Mage and Defense Grid, and I'll suggest you don't do that.
But even if you do,
even if you do, it's like you have a pass. You can get away with it. Because you're gonna get enough tech outside of that.
God, that reminds me, I so wanted to use Magen in my Arboret game. That was like my fantasy.
that was like your thing.
I'm
you
sorry.
said it at the beginning of the game. You said if I use Magen as my last play of the game, I win.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, no, Jolnar, you have a lot of wiggle room, and that's always good for a new player, for it to just basically be like, listen, like, you could make some mistakes and it wouldn't be huge. The thing that I get afraid of with Jolnar is that Jolnar is one of those factions that, like, other, like, more experienced players will have a very specific way of playing against early game.
Yeah.
And having a new player in that position, it gets kind of weird. It's a little bit strange. Like, I could see people playing lighter on Jolnar, which could end up biting them in the butt if that player actually figures out, how a lot of the tech works, and then by the end of the game is like actually a powerhouse or something. But the other thing is that, like, you really don't want to, like, take advantage of a new. I don't know. I feel two ways about it, because a lot of people play really aggressive against Jolnar early game, and that's like what they say. That's what they lean on. Is like, oh, you got to be aggressive with them because they have to be neutralized early. And that -1, I mean, it really hurts you when it comes to ground combat. Like, and I think it could maybe in like an inverted way teach you the kind of soul Yin Brotherhood lessons of basically just being like, wow, I totally got screwed because of not having enough ground forces. Yeah.
Right.
Like, and realizing
agree with
how important that is.
I would say the flip side of your argument is, I agree, if the only new player in the game gets Universities, it's actually kind of a scary position for them. But what's more common is you've got a group of new players.
Oh, for sure.
And in that situation, Universities are an amazing pick, because nobody's going to be that aggressive, and that means Universities are going to have plenty of time to build up.
I agree.
Yeah, I was going to say that Universities, the biggest thing is for them is, and what worries me about them getting picked first is actually somebody winning the game and not really earning it.
Not even knowing why they won it, like, just because the objective, the tech objective comes
imbalance,
out. And they just win kind of by nature of passively getting tech,
which is fun for them, but at the same time, it's not going to teach them a whole lot if I just teched the entire game and I won. I don't know what I.
You're
really
never
going
to be able to recreate that to the same effect as what you did with Jolnar.
Exactly.
It's not the same thing as Yssaril tribes, where, like, you can use the lessons with other factions. Like, with every other faction, you're not going to get as much tech, so the tech objectives are going to be more difficult.
Right.
And I agree. You're not really learning the right lesson if it's a very tech objective heavy game.
But you can learn the tech objective, or you can learn the techs. If you play Jolnar 4 times and just tank each color, you could probably figure out most of what you want to do in the future. So there's that. There is some future building there, but maybe not so much in terms of, like, how do I overcome obstacles? It's not really what Jolnar does. They don't have a whole lot of obstacles.
Right. But if anything, too, it's recognizing that you have a weakness. I mean, every new player can see that. They go -1 to combat. That sucks. I need to find a way out of combat at every level. And so you're going to learn some deal-making skills, especially with that. This is the opposite argument as the Nalu Collective too, right? You have like the best promissory note in the game, and you have a reason to try to sell it to people because you're going to want protection. And so I think a Jolnar player is going to probably learn a lot about making deals to keep from getting attacked, because they're going to be terrified of getting attacked because they know they're worse at it. They know that they're not on the right end of any battle, so they're going to do whatever they can to get out of fights. And I think that's a valuable lesson.
I like that point because other players are going to make that happen. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like you said it almost like, oh, well, you'll just figure that out on your own. No, what's going to happen is people are going to be like, hey, can I get that racial promissory note? I'll help you, like, or some, you know what I mean?
Right.
I could totally see, like, I mean, I would do that if I was playing in a game.
People are going to come to you with offers. Also, you having 4 commodities, like, people are going to want to do deals with you. If there's any other 4 commodity factions at the table, it's like, I would rather deal with Jolnar and do a 4-for-4 than deal with anybody else or whatever. Like, you're going to get more offers on the table than anybody else, and that's what's going to open up that end of the game to you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In fact, I think that's like kind of our first example of a faction that will kind of get you playing a little table talk, and actually kind of getting off the board.
Right. Another good faction for that is the Extra Kingdom. The Extra Kingdom kind of gets to, again, 4 commodities. I wouldn't say their promissory note is as amazing, but just the ability that they have, like the fact that people come to the table and are like, hey, this agenda is going to really suck for me. I will pay you to quash it.
Right.
Like, if you to be able to sit in that opportunity and just have people come to you begging for your services is like a really nice special little perk you get when you play as Extra.
Yeah, and
Space Mafia.
it's another situation where players are going to like create those opportunities for you to learn because they know that you can do this thing and they might need you to do that thing.
Right,
basically.
right, exactly. I think you're going to get a lot of deal making. Also, it's just known that they're the peace turtles, and so that's what's funny about it to me with Extra is I actually am now starting to shift my thinking and think that Extra need to be very aggressive to be effective, and that comes from playing them like a beginner would, which is so often people want to play them as the peace turtles and they want to just negotiate. But the problem with Extra is one of the things you learn as Extra is how to set up a good PDS network and how to just defend yourself. But you don't necessarily, you don't really learn how to take objectives and score them. And so often a new player plays as Extra and ends with 4 points. And they're kind of like, I don't know what else I was supposed to do. I did like what it seemed like my faction was good at. So that's, I think, a big pitfall of Extra. But I think the skills you're learning, I don't feel like anybody plays Extra and doesn't learn a lot about TI, despite maybe falling really far behind in points. I still think they learn a lot about the game itself.
Yeah, and I think like I would be really surprised to see a new player play Extra for the first time and win. Really at all, just because like you said, it's hard for an experienced player to even like set up all of the VPs necessary while also building like a PDS network and playing, generally kind of slower than other factions. I'm actually kind of on the fence as to whether Extra is a good first pick for a new player, but I do agree that you are going to learn a little more about like, negotiation and table talk and stuff. And it just feels good. It feel like, generally speaking, when I try a strategy game for the first time, I generally kind of gravitate towards the defensive faction. Like, because
at
it just
very
it
least
feels
you're gonna have
good.
a more comfortable game.
Yeah. It feels like, well, if I'm defensive, then I'm probably gonna have a little more room to like mess up a bit. And it's always intimidating when you're playing a strategy game for the first time to like be aggressive or like strike out or like make plays basically. And Extra, you can make plays without putting yourself at risk. If you have that flagship in a PDS network, and that always feels really good. Yeah. And that's it. It's always feels really safe to have that kind of setup.
Yeah, I mean, it's no mistake that they're like the 8th faction we've brought up. We don't highly recommend them as a first faction, but they are, they're a decent enough. And that goes especially true for our last faction we're going to talk about, which is the space cats. We talked about the peace turtles. It's time to talk about the space cats.
Yeah.
It's funny because Hakan and Extra are both in the learn to play rulebook as like a first faction you should play as, but they're both, I mean, they're harder to play, but there's certainly no doubt that if you play a Hakan, you're really gonna learn deal making.
Right.
I mean, more than there's no way you're not. It is ingrained in the abilities that you're gonna learn how to strike up deals with other people.
Yeah, they're gonna bring it out of you, you know.
Right.
And the
well,
other
if anything
thing
too,
yeah,
you're gonna do your first trade, and if you're a new player, you're probably just gonna be like, I want everyone to refresh their commodities.
Yeah, probably.
And you're gonna like give 2 to 2. Like you're going. I feel like within your first game, you do 3 rounds of trade, and you start to realize, oh, I can really use these 6 commodities against people. Like I think people within one game learn how much more strict they can get with trade if they're playing as Hakan, because they learn what they can and can't do a lot better.
Yeah, and it also it's like the same story with Extra, like what we were saying with Jolnar. The other players are going to bring it out of you because Hakan, there's so much to gain from being their trade buddy that the other players are basically going to bring you into the conversation without you having to do anything. You know, like if you're like a 2 commodity faction or like some of these other factions we've talked about, you kind of have to like make your own way in the world when it comes to trade. And Hakan, that is not the case. I mean, everyone's going to be like, so what are you doing with those 6 you got there?
Well,
you know?
and even more so, and this is a little bit of a Sorrel Tribes thing too, you can trade action cards, and everyone's just going to be like, I don't know, what action cards do you have? What do you have any action cards you can give me as part of this deal? Or I have action cards. Can I give you this? And can I give you this? So you're just going to learn a little bit more about like every component of the game than everyone, because everyone's going to be offering you those components. Everyone wants to just get in on your side to be able to make a lot of money off of you.
Yeah, and I think that actually might be the reason that they're the last one that we're going to talk about today, is just that there's a lot of, you have to understand a lot of economies of the game to really play Hakan that well, and that there's a lot to consider when people are making deals with you or proposing deals with you. And considering it's probably a first timer that we're talking about, you're probably not necessarily going to know whether it's a good deal or not. I mean, how would you really, you know? Like, I think that with commodity trading, it can be pretty obvious what a good or bad deal is. But with action cards, no way. There's no way that you're going to really know for sure what's a good price for a card, or what card makes sense to trade. You know, it's that in that way, I think Hakan could potentially be overwhelming for new players. But you do have a lot of wiggle room with all those things because you get the most, basically.
Yeah. I think we hit a lot of good points all on that. I think we started with, if you're listening to us as literally a brand new player, someone has shown you this podcast, I think the biggest thing is to make your pecking order the list that we just gave you in order, right?
Yeah.
So Barony Aletnev, L1Z1X MindNet, Federation of Soul, maybe insert Yin Brotherhood somewhere else, but then definitely Nalu Collective, Isarl Tribes, Universities of Jolnar, Extra Kingdom, Emirates of Hakan. That's like your list of factions you want to get in that order.
Right. And also, like, in the end, I think we put this out in a way that made sense to us as a list, but it also just has to do with, like, who you are as a player. Like what EJ was saying earlier, like, a lot of people come at this, like, looking at it like space risk. And if you're a space risk player, you should probably play a space risk faction, right? If you're more of, like, a social gamer, then, like, Emirates of Hakan might be a good pick for you.
It's almost like you have to reverse the order. If you're
exactly.
Be that way.
If you're coming at this from that social side, go in the exact opposite way I said.
Yeah. I think all of that makes sense, and it's great that one of the great things about learning Twilight Imperium is that the factions are so specifically tied to certain mechanics of the game.
Yes.
So I mean, you obviously you go to Jolnar for your tech, and then what? I mean, what's weird is kind of the factions that we've left out. It's not like you don't learn things by playing those factions. It's just that the lessons that they teach you are more specific to that faction, right?
Right. You're going to learn everything with every faction. We are just trying to point out the factions where you're learning a little bit extra, in a certain vein,
right?
Or learning more broadly. Actually, you're learning you're not learning in one niche. You're learning the whole game and also owning that skill.
Right. Well, it's cool, and I hope you know. I hope you know stuff now, little boy or girl. And we took you to school once again. Maybe that's what we can tag these episodes as school. The school episodes. Everybody sit down. I think we've definitely done that bit before.
We have. People hated it.
Yeah, people really
School
did hate
bit.
that bit. But yeah, do you want to go to errata?
I do. I will
out-
say this much: if you're a brand new player, again, if this episode got shared to you as a brand new player, we're about to go to errata, which is where we talk about stuff we talked about last week, and we get listener responses. So if you're a brand new player and this is your first time listening to Space Cats, you might not get much out of the rest of the errata because we're going to talk about some really specific stuff. We're going to jump over to the errata and we're going to talk about the tournament drafting method that we are coming up with.
Right. Also, if you're a new player, join the Good Yin Brotherhood, and then play against
play
us,
games
and
with you.
we'll clown on you. We will just wreck your shop, you new player. We won't be nice to you at all, and we'll make you play Sardak. Yeah, you're gonna play Sardak, and you're gonna like it, and that's because you know what? I want to end with saying that the Good Yin Brotherhood is really good at the game thus far, and I was really hoping they would all suck. Like that's what I was hoping that it was
You
going
wanted
to be
some
like,
free
oh,
wins?
we'll play with some fans, and then they just don't know how to play, and they're not good, and then we get to just troll them. But man, it was
The opposite experience.
Yeah, it was the opposite of that.
It was people who it was a player that showed up being like, I want to ruin Matt's day. I paid him $25 to ruin 6 hours of his life.
That's a good deal. I think that's what it should be.
That's a good deal.
We're going to have a new Patreon level that's just like, ruin us. Just ruin our lives.
You pay $75 to break my plumbing.
Yeah, and you could come over and step on my foot. All right, let's do the errata now. Hey, welcome to errata time. This isn't really like we didn't really like make mistakes. Although, okay, actually, I want to open with this. It felt like there were a lot of people that like felt really strongly about our drafting method that we talked about from last week, and I just want to reiterate at the top, all of this is like work in progress, not for this tournament, but like it will probably be what we have proposed for the actual tournament. I don't see that really changing.
Right.
I think the episode was us kind of saying like, so here's what we got.
Yes.
But like all of this is an experiment. The entire thing is an experiment. And so what that means is that there's not already like a layout of how exactly to do this. There are a lot of things that we're trying to address that maybe some of it maybe doesn't even need to be addressed, but we are trying to.
Yes.
And also always remember that like everybody plays this game very differently, wildly differently.
That is the biggest factor to me is we are trying to approach this from a standpoint of, I don't know, trying to appeal to, I guess, like as many people as we can. And I mean that even for more than just the people playing. I mean, we want these games to appeal to people to watch.
Right.
We want people to watch them and to be able to get good entertainment out of them. So that's what we're designing the rules around. So there's going to be plenty of times where like I agree that like the game is more fun to play if we set it up a different way. But
Right.
that's not what we're trying to set up. We're not trying to set up a game that is especially fun to play. We're trying to set up a game that has competitive value and it's really fun to watch.
Right.
Or at least talk about and hear about. So yeah, let's start with this first one from Ronald SF on Twilight Imperium subreddit. And they said, we have lifted the idea from Shattered Ascension of everyone getting their 2 secret objectives dealt to them before any faction banning selecting starts. This gives players another strategic consideration when considering what to do during the setup. Then, after everything has been set up, the last step is to discard one of the secret objectives. Ooh. This was an interesting idea. That's something we haven't even really talked about. We kind of just left the objectives things are like, well, once we finished all the normal drafting, then we'll do the objectives the way you're supposed to do it. But this is, I don't know if I want to do this for this tournament, but I am very interested in this idea of like, I have 2 secret objectives in front of me, and I'm going to pick a faction that works for one of those. I'm going to make sure to draft a faction that works for one of those.
I like it too as just another variable. I really like variables that don't feel like super shifty like that. Like that's why I think we're both like not into the speaker token being a part of that whole phase.
We'll talk about that more too. There's a lot of errata about the speaker token.
Right,
but yes, it's so much more shifty. But just like what your first secret objective is, that's not like the most deterministic thing within the game.
And
it's
also
not gonna change your entire standing in the game to have like a different secret objective first.
I like it as something that might influence what you're doing, but obviously you're just not guaranteed to get the faction that you want. Like that will never really happen.
Exactly.
But the
you
idea
can't
that
make a finite decision based on that. It's just going to help inform your decision-making process.
Right. I like it. I don't think that at this point, I don't think we'll do it because like I said, we've kind of set that in stone. But that might be something interesting to try. Just see.
There's a few things
goes.
in this. There's a few things in this errata that are going to be things that we definitely want to try for later, and we're going to kind of keep in the think tank.
Yeah. I got one. I'll read it. Next one is from Brian via Discord. Each player, he's just pointing out the percentage chances of certain draws. So each player has a little bit over 2% chance to draw both Jolnar and Soul in the same hand of 3. That's when we're talking about at the very beginning, you're dealt 3 factions and you choose one to ban. Player F, the player that only gets 2 factions to choose to ban from, has a 0.7% chance of drawing both Jolnar and Soul. Now, why is Brian bringing this up?
I just think it's just fun math, but it also helps prove the point of it's probably very common that Jolnar and Soul are not even going to make it to the pooling step because it's pretty low odds that one person is going to get both of them in their hands. And honestly, I think Hunter and I like early on accepted that about this method. Yeah. Is that like it's sort of designed, it has this random element up first to sort of really weed out the like really hard ones that like the way too strong and the way too weak factions. It is designed to sort of eliminate them, and we accept that is part of what happens. We've gotten some weird errata from people saying things like that they think part of the game, like part of the point of TI is about getting different factions and like having to deal with what you're given or whatever, which first off isn't true. I mean, the rulebook just says pick factions. So the idea that like we should make situations where like Muat is definitely in the pool, I'm super not into that idea because that's going to completely. I mean, that will be the reason that player doesn't win that game is because they got stuck with Muat against a Soul and a Jolnar player. That's a disaster.
I have a question. Just based on last week's episode, I was wondering who you ban in the case of getting Jolnar and Soul in your hand.
Just good question, Hunter. If we had Jolnar and Soul, who would we ban?
What's my third?
No, if you're the player, if you're player F,
it's gonna be one of those.
So I'm player F.
The other one's Muat.
The other one's Muat. Jolnar or Soul.
I would rather ban Soul because I don't want to have to deal with that.
You don't want to put up.
And
with those tactics.
Jolnar might be neutralized. It kind of goes.
The objective,
both ways.
the tech objectives might not. That was my argument too. We talked about this earlier, but yeah, if the tech objectives don't come out, Jolnar is kind of just like any other faction. Mm-hmm. They're only ridiculously good when they score a bunch of tech objectives and win without even thinking. Right. But in any other game, you know, they have to play just as hard as everybody else.
And they also, success. I mean, they might have a really rough early game, which could, I mean, that could just ruin it. You know.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some speaker token stuff. Aviator said, would someone elaborate on the issue of granting too much power, paraphrasing, by having speaker token in the pool of selectable things? Yeah. And Zendog also said, step 1 of the entire rule set is determine speaker, and step 2 is choose factions. It seems like too much to mess with. For me personally, it takes a few factions right out of the game, as I can't risk the random speaker die putting them too far down the list after I've committed to playing them. I know most people think Arborek in this case. Arborek is put way more out of the running if you can't guarantee you're going to be high in speaker order.
Right.
I'm not saying put speaker in as a choice when drafting races and seats. I'm just saying randomly determine the speaker somewhere near the front of the process, then go ahead as described. That way you can use the knowledge of who the speaker was going to be when selecting your faction. So, this is a lot of topics at once. The first being the reason we don't want speaker token as part of the drafting process, which is what a lot of people do, which is my choice can either be picking a faction, picking a position, or taking the speaker token. We tried that and we don't like it because the first person going almost has no incentive to do that. They would never take speaker token. So you're kind of guaranteed it's going to be like third or fourth pick usually. And then everybody just picks factions based on where the speaker is, which is a valid, smart way to play, and it is good decision making. And this is what Zendog is kind of getting at, is saying, why not randomly determine the speaker and then do your faction and position? But because position is inherently tied to faction selection in our method, we have to exclude speaker. If we later come up with a method that lets you pick factions and then later pick positions, and it's something balanced that we like, I would consider putting speaker up front. If you pick your position and then you pick speaker token and then you pick your faction or whatever, I think that's fine. I think picking a faction based on when you're going to get your thing is great, but I really hate when people pick their pie slices purely based on the first round. I want our players to pick a pie slice based on the merits of that pie slice and what is in it.
Yeah.
What tech specialties, what influence versus resources ratio does that have? Those are the types of decisions Hunter and I want to commentate on more than anything. Because it's boring to just have the speaker come out and go, okay, well, they picked that spot because they want to go second in speaker order. That's it. That's the only reason they picked that spot, and nothing else matters.
Yeah, and I think we just played too many games where that seemed to just be the only factor, was just like, where am I going to be in speaker order?
Right. It's smart decision making, but it's not fun decision making. And I agree that it cuts some factions out, and I'm not disputing that idea. But the flip side of that is being able to pick SAR based on speaker order is super annoying. I mean, if SAR gets to get SAR and also get speaker and know that they're going to get warfare, like, that's just the grossest thing in the world. Yeah. I would rather SAR have to pick SAR and live with the consequence of maybe picking fourth or fifth in speaker order and not getting warfare. I would much rather that scenario than, I guess we're not going to see as many Arborex as we would have seen.
Right. And also I think we also just like the idea of kind of being a gambler in the system. So like picking Arborec and just being like, I'm just going to see where speaker lies, and maybe it's me, maybe it isn't. The odds are not good, basically, in general, but that's the type of thing that would be really exciting to see. It's always really exciting to see people take big risks, and with speaker token in play, it always just seems like there's too much known. Like there's everyone is a lot more predictable, and there's, I think, just less to talk about, because it's like, well, that player is going to go third, I guess, that one there.
Yeah. And again, to the idea of like we are incentivizing other factions over others, that is inherent in any drafting method.
Right.
Like you cannot avoid having priority in, and we do not want a tournament where it's randomized. We already talked about, like, we don't want a tournament that just forces someone to play Winnu, because that's not a fair tournament at all.
Right.
If we want to have a fair tournament, we have to shake things up. We need to have this drafting method, which means better factions are going to get picked more often. And we've tried to design it where it's not just like we did the coverage of the Gen Con game, and I know a lot of you haven't seen like that footage yet, but it was like the same 5 factions in like every single game.
And a Muat.
Yeah, and then one Muat. But the point is, we expect to have that same problem in ours. We just wanted to be a different set of 5 factions. We wanted to shake it up so that we weren't seeing exactly the same factions in every single game. We think this method, yes, there will be factions that are in a lot of games, but it won't be the exact same factions that were at Gen Con.
Also, it's just, it gives people something to win. Like, if we see someone like get soul somehow, it'll be like they won the lottery, and that'll be like, wow, they got that. They were able to play the system correctly, and they won.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't just luck into getting soul. They had to, they had to get soul into the final pool, and then they had to go first and pick soul and be
Right.
stuck with whatever pie slice was left to them.
Right,
Like they had
right.
to make that commitment
But
from the get go.
if it's all even, that might be just fine. Like if it's a good balanced map, then I could see someone being like, you know what, I'm going with it, and then that's a cool
absolutely.
moment. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. So this next one is from Kraken, who we played with, and now I hate him, and he's my biggest enemy. No, Kraken's great, and he said, but this is based on the game we played. We played a 5-player game, and we tried to use this method, and we ran into some problems. So let's say it's a tournament game, and it only has 5 players. Which is absolutely going to happen, by the way. In this tournament, there will be 5-player games, guaranteed. We cannot make the math work out in such a way that doesn't have 5-player games. So how does the pregame draft work with 5 players? Hunter, I've been bouncing this idea around in my head for a while, trying to figure out what the best method is. And my first idea was just, let's pretend that there was a player that didn't do it, and that we immediately get rid of 3 factions from the get-go.
Right.
But that always felt a little weird. I don't know if you agree, and I don't know, EJ, what your thoughts would be on just straight up banning 3 factions, and like, should everybody know what those 3 factions are, or should it be revealed once we reveal, the first initial nominations? But it just felt weird to me to have we designed this whole drafting method so that we, the players, would be selecting all these factions. So then to have just this sort of unanimous, or not unanimous, this sort of autonomous thing happen where 3 things are also thrown out. Like in our game that we played, we through in one step of the process, we just randomly threw another faction into the mix. And it just didn't feel right to me. I didn't like the idea that we designed this whole drafting method for us to pick everything. So I want to compare the idea of just getting rid of 3 factions to this idea, and it's a little bit more complex. So hear me out. You've got 5 players, and similar to the other method, you're going to have player A through E. Player A, B, and C each have a hand of 4, and they ban 1. Player D has a hand of 3 and bans 1. And player E has a hand of 2 and bans 1, right? So we still have banned 5 factions, and now we have we have nominations available to us out of 12 factions. Immediately after we've revealed the 12 factions, player D, who had 1 less than the norm, but 1 more than player E, they get to ban 1 faction from the remaining list to put us back at 11. Then, and I should say, we'll get into this after, but this is not actually specifically the sequence of event. This isn't the order. I'll explain this point better later. But after D bans 1, E does the same thing as before, selects 2 factions to throw into the pool, and then D selects 1, and then C, B, and A all select 1. So you end up with 6 factions, 1 more than how many players you have. We end up with the same selection process during the snake draft. So I'm curious if that second ban, so technically player D gets to ban 1 extra faction out of it besides everybody else, but they do it with, I don't know, is it more information or is it less information?
Yeah,
I'm kind of curious how you feel that plays out.
Yeah, because
and if that's better than just banning 3 factions randomly.
Yeah, the fact that D's getting to look at the whole picture and then ban 1, that feels pretty big, but also E's the select 2 is pretty big as well. So yeah. I feel like it balances out. I don't know. We would have to try it. We need to try it.
Is there a way we could make D draw 5 from the remaining 12? Or do something like that? Because I don't...
before you reveal 12, they draw another
12,
hand.
They draw another smaller hand or a bigger hand or whatever.
Maybe. I kind of that's sort of where I'm at right now, is I want to put this out to the community and get some more ideas, because we actually hadn't really thought clearly enough about how to change this up with 5 players, and I'm a little bit curious where people stand. This is my current offer, and I want to hear everyone's opinions and notes. The one thing that I should make very, very clear that it has gotten very muddied between this method and even the standard 6 method is we keep referring to player F and player E. Let me try to word this correctly. Your assignment for how many things you draw is not tied to the order in which you do things. So the way we should say that we actually do this, let's get back into the 6-player draft method. The first thing Hunter and I will do is give everyone their factions. We will deal 5 people 3 factions and 1 player 2 factions. Then we will roll dice and we will put them in a sequence. So the person who has 2 factions in their hand will not necessarily always ban theirs last or whatever.
Right.
But it is a snake draft of, I mean, technically the first half doesn't matter, but everyone bans one and then you reverse order to nominate factions, which is actually on our Discord. Lexi gave us the term nominate for adding a faction to the potential pick, which is way better than select.
Right.
So you have a ban, you have a nominate, and then you have a pick. So in terms of nominating, that happens in an order, and that means player F, as I stupidly called them, they are not in the same position in that order every single time. Sometimes you're going to pick, or you're going to nominate 2 factions 3rd in the order. Sometimes you're going to nominate 2 factions 6th in the order. It purely depends on your dice roll. That is not set in stone, and I don't think we made that especially clear in the last episode. So hopefully that clears that up, and then with this 5-player thing, that's even more specific since now we have 2 people with different sized hands that have to do things in different orders. Those will happen at different timings depending on what you rolled.
Yeah.
Oofa doofa. This next errata is from Gaznik, and it says, I agree, it causes a lot of problems if you are more likely to advance in a 5-player game on top of the difference of the balance between the players. It's hard to find a way that people would see it as fair. I'm curious, Hunter, how you feel about there being 5-player games in this tournament. And in some cases within a round where there are other people that are playing 6-player games. Like, it is almost a guaranteed chance that in the preliminary round, about half the games are going to be 6-player games and half are going to be 5-player games.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. You are going to be statistically more likely to advance in a 5-player game. I think it's just it's unavoidable. I mean,
It's the nature of the beast. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. There's just not really a way around of it. I originally suggested having like dummy players, like players that would fill it out and not be playing for keeps. But the potential then for someone to like go through but not actually win is kind of a bummer. Yeah. But I mean, we are using the warp zone, correct?
Right.
For
So the
5-player?
goal, I would say our number one solution to that is that we are going to be making maps that are as balanced as we can make them. So our 5-player games, really the only difference in them is that one less strategy card is getting picked.
Right.
And also, like, if people start doing crazy support for the throne trades, like, yeah, in a 6-player game, everyone can do a 1-for-1 swap with somebody, and in a 5-player game, that gets messed up. I would say those are the 2 key differences between a 6-player and a 5-player game in our tournament, because the maps should be the same sort of balance and the same access to stuff.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of a give and take of like, yeah, it's more likely for you as an individual to be the winner, just statistically. But also, yeah, there are some. It's more difficult, I think, in some ways because of that one less strategy card being picked. So I don't know.
You have a weirder game that you're going to have to play through. So
yeah.
I'm sorry that it's bound to happen, but I mean, I guess I'm just sorry that we didn't get 208 or 216 contestants. If we had 216, it would have been a perfect math tournament. But you know, that
perfect math.
Perfect. It would have been a perfect math. Hunter, give me that next errata.
So this one is from Mosar. During the first phase, where each player bans a faction, what parts of that are hidden versus public? So when you ban, that's hidden. That you're banning from your hand. And
Which is why the order doesn't actually matter, because we're not revealing.
No, it doesn't.
We're not revealing any of the bans like as you go.
Right.
We thought about it, but I don't think we liked it. We would rather you just take one out of your hand, put it somewhere else face down, and then once all 11 are selected, we reveal. So that part is the only part of the entire process that is secret. Every single thing else is public.
Right. Yeah. That's basically it.
Yeah. And that's it. We had one more question from Kraken, but I already kind of answered it in his previous errata, which was just about like what is the ordering. And so it is, again, that point of your hand pick is not tied to your order in the process.
Right.
And so I just want to make sure that's very, very clear. So I'll quit referring to them as player A through F, I guess. I don't know what to call them.
Yeah, don't do that anymore, you naughty boy.
Hunter, we did it again. We did a long episode. We always do long episodes these days. So do you want to give us the rundown so we can read a really awesome play of the week and get out of here?
Yeah. You can hit us up on Twitter for game updates and announcements. We've got a Facebook, Space Cats Peace Turtles. What do you know? It's the same name. And there's announcements, and you can text Matt in the morning or at night or wherever. If you're,
you know what's funny, actually, Hunter? You now have a job where you're up all night, so theoretically, you could answer those questions in the middle of the night. You could answer our European players' questions.
No!
So everyone, Hunter is now on late night duty.
That's
with the
Hunter just
Facebook.
got doxxed.
Oh, dang. Yeah, I will be up all night. So Scandinavian players, hit me up, let me know what's going on. Check out the Twilight Imperium subreddit. We post there weekly. It's always a good place for discussion. And if you want to get that, those tasty erratas in, we messed up, you hate us or whatever, or you love us, not that we would read that one. We just read the hate here. Board Game Geek Guild, check that out. Discussion there with RoboFish and RoboFish's calendar, so you can see what's going on with RoboFish, like where he's going to be.
I need to give him permission to his own separate calendar on the BGG Guild.
Yeah, it would be funny if RoboFish used it just for like regular, like go to the grocery store and like laundry, stuff like that. You can send us an email. If you have a This Imperium Life submission or a play of the week, please send that to spacecatspeaceturtles@gmail.com. Patreon, check it out. At this point, the tournament signups are donezo.
Actually, as of this morning, if you're listening to this episode on Tuesday when it releases, we're done. Like, the patron is done signed up. People have been given the link and are now signed up. So that I already have it broken down. Next week, I think we'll go over in more detail, like what the structure of the tournament is going to look like. But I have the general idea of it already typed up and kind of in an Excel spreadsheet somewhere. So I'll say this much. Double elimination has a little bit of play in it.
For sure.
Yeah, there will be some double elimination, not very much, but very limited. The whole tournament is going to be about, I think it's like 25 games. Well, that's how long our tournament will be. Which, if we are doing only 1 or 2 per weekend, I mean, this will be a long process, and we have to schedule all of it. So there's a lot more work to be done on this tournament, but we're just now really getting to where we can start actually getting things on the books.
I'm so excited about it. Check out our Discord for fun conversations and Patreon benefits. It's also a very good place to get errata in now. We've really been focusing on that more. I really like all the discussion being like separated by episode is super great. Please rate us on your podcast app of choice, especially Apple Podcasts / iTunes, or just wherever. Also, you know what's something funny? By the time you listen to this, I will have already done it. But tonight, I'm actually going to be on a podcast festival in Portland doing comedy. and don't worry, I'm not doing this show because that wouldn't really make sense at all.
Yeah.
But you know what? I will shout out. I will be like, hey, I actually have a podcast, but it would have no place here. Which someday we should do a live episode of Space Cats.
Someday we'll do. I can't wait till we can do live shows at Nerd Stuff.
Yeah,
we want to do a live show at Gen Con. That's a goal.
That would be
say
super
out loud.
Cool. That would be great. But yeah, I'm also a stand-up comedian. You can see me every Thursday in Portland, co-hosting Earthquake Hurricane at Ford Food and Drink. That starts at 8. On November 18th, I will be at a show called Sincerity is Gross. That happens at the Slide In, and that starts at 8 o'clock. November 23rd, I will be doing a show called Looney Bin at 8 p.m. At Kelly's Olympium, which is like a cool biker bar. And then on November 31st, I'm doing a show with Don't Tell Comedy, which is actually a secret location style show, like a pop-up show. Very cool type show, comes to us from Los Angeles. And that show, I believe, will start at 8, but you would have to message me via, either via the Facebook, or you can direct message me via Discord, and I will let you know the secret location. Matt, do you want to thank those Patreon?
I want to thank some patrons. I want to thank our Space Kitties. We got a lot now, Hunter. We're doing great with Space Kitties. I want to thank Jimbov. I want to thank Jotapake. I want to thank Dustin Doom. I want to thank Nathan Swenson. And I want to thank the return of In Mac We Trust.
Whoa.
He's back, baby. Mac is back, the map maker. I also want to thank Michelle Maynard, Nikolai Rigo, I don't know, and William.
Yeah.
And we've got a play of the week, and since we haven't let EJ talk very much, we've got a really long play of the week that we're going to have EJ read for you. This play of the week is brought to you by Jensen, also known as Chills on Hills Jensen or Dies on Hills Jensen in the Discord.
Depending on his mood.
Depending on his mood. So, EJ, give us that Jensen play of the week.
All right, Jensen says, I'm Ghost. I helped Sol get Minister of War in exchange for a ceasefire. Sol has Shard of the Throne. Round 4 began. I was at 5 points, Sol and Sardak were at 4, and Arborek at 3. Whispering to Sardak and Arborek separately, I convinced them to attack Sol. Sardak would send his main fleet at Mechatol. Arborek would come up from behind him to distract his fleets, and I would take the home system. I told both of them the other agreed to a joint attack, so they both accepted the deal. Sardak rushed Mechatol and with a scary fleet of exo-triremes, but Sol's advanced fighters held him off, destroying Sardak's main fleet. Arborek, who had warfare, took the equidistant system they shared with the Sol and agreed to time warfare out for me. My first action was to play repeal law on the Minister of War. I let Sol know of my intentions a round early, baiting out his signal jamming, a card he had almost used in the past. I offered the Sardak my support to sabotage the card, which he agreed to. Then I attacked the Sol home system and took it with no casualties. Jord was mine, as was the Shard of the Throne. Then came the moment of truth. Sol turned his main fleet, what was left of it at least, after my scheming with Arborek and Sardak, to attack my small one. I had the Sol ceasefire, but I had plans for it. I passed on playing it and faced his ships. Thanks to some freaky rolling and Duranium on my flagship and Dread, I won the fight, leaving me with just my flagship. Arborek flipped Warfare, and I built a War Sun on my home system. All of my plans came to fruition when I offered Sol a trade, his ceasefire for his support for the throne. I was in his home system after all. He couldn't take it back and would have no chance to win as long as I had his ceasefire and his home. Besides, I argued, if I have your support, I will not be attacking you again. You will be safe. The desperate Sol agreed to the trade, moving me to 7. The game was won. I had finished with the 4 PDS secret in my hand, the 2-unit upgrade public objective, and to top it off, turn their fleets to dust. I poker-faced the activation of a wormhole containing a single cruiser and fired 3 PDS 2 shots that would win me the game on round 4. I rolled a 1, and a 2. All misses. When I scored my 2 objectives in the status phase and went to 9, the table finally began the coalition that should have formed round 2 when I scored 4 points. They plotted how to stop me, but to no avail. My home system was protected by gum. Had a War Sun and a PDS and 7 infantry on it. Sardak had my support for the throne. Arborek was slow and on the other side of the galaxy, and Sol had just been demolished. All I had to do was activate Quan and fire PDS at a cruiser there to score my 10th point. I blew the cruiser out of the sky on my first turn. The game ended turn 1, round 5.
Wow.
Scene. Yeah, here's what drives me crazy. Jensen likes to talk about his games in our Discord. He gets in there and he tells us about, this was his 12th out of 13 wins as Ghost. His 12th win out of 13 games as Ghost. He's only lost once.
Wow.
But I hate hearing about Jensen games because I hear the things that players let him get away with, and I'm like, if he played with Hunter and I, we wouldn't even give him an inch.
Yeah, Matt would probably call all of those things out, basically.
Yeah, I would just be screaming at everyone about all the things they're letting Jensen get away with all game. Yeah, I've even heard people, before Jensen sent us this, I was hearing people talk about this game, and all I ever heard people refer to this game as is, oh, you talking about the game where you convinced everyone to gut Soul even though you were winning?
God, what
yeah, that would be so irritating as the Soul player. Like, why are you all letting him do this? He's in the lead, and you're letting him take my shard of the throne.
It's such a sad trade, too, that, like, you can have your ceasefire back as long as you give me support for the game. That's so sad.
Honestly, that's the play of the week to me. That's why I wanted to put this in there, is because that's a delicious moment of like, yeah, I'll give you your ceasefire back, but you're giving me your point. So,
wow. Yeah.
Take your pick. Yeah, great play, Jensen. He's got plenty of ghost plays in his belt, so I think it was finally, up to us to showcase one of them.
Yeah, that's a good one. I love just God. I would be so upset to have been Soul, and I don't even think I would have taken that. I wouldn't have even taken that deal. I would have been like, no way,
just gut me.
No, I'm gonna fall on this sword. I'm not gonna help you. You know? Yeah. I would have been so upset just at the audacity of that offer. I would have been so salty and mean about it, which I'm trying to be better about, by the way. I'm trying to lower my salt intake and quit.
Hunter got called out on the YouTube recently for a game where he was very salty.
I just read, you guys, if you listen every week, you remember the episode. It was like a month or two back, and I was just like, I was mean to a guy, and it sucks, and now there's just like this record of it. But the thing is, that all happened, and I think the people that really keep up with us, they all saw that, but people still watch that video. A new person just watched that and was just like, wow, Hunter's a jerk. And really hit me hard. And I read, I stay up all night now for my new job. So I read that at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm tired. I'm feeling, I'm just up by myself, feeling kind of lonely. And I just read somebody being like, God, Hunter's a jerky pants. What a little dookie boy. And, and I agree. I was a dookie boy, and now it's just there forever. Just completely enshrined, me being a jerk. Screw you,
I think
Matt.
that's a wonderful note to leave this podcast on.
Yeah. Screw you, screw everybody.
Goodbye, everyone. Hunter's a dookie boy.
I'm a naughty boy. Pew, pew, and I'm shooting my gun off in the air. I'll naughty boy forever, I guess. I'm gonna show my therapist that video. Hey, so you know how I do all that stuff with cardboard and plastic? Here's something I did. What does this mean?
You have to watch all 6 hours to understand.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Space Cat's Peace Turtles, and thanks to Ben Prunty for the use of his music. You can find more at benpruntymusic.com and benprunty.bandcamp.com. Pax Magnifica, Bellum Gloriosum.